We are up to chapter 51, for those who are following along inside. That's found on page 648. So this is a slightly different topic than we have been discussing for the last, well, about 10 chapters or so. We're starting chapter 51, page 648. Where is your soul located? That's what we're going to discuss today.
Okay.
So we just concluded a long section of Tanya, which dealt with various levels of love of God and fear of God and awe and how to create the feeling and so on and so forth. These final chapters are a little more esoteric in nature, but and it deals with the concept of what we studied in chapter 35, that a man should not walk 4 cubits, which is roughly 6 feet, with his head uncovered, meaning without a yarmulke or some sort of a head covering. Why? Because the divine presence rests, it says, on his head, and therefore his head should be covered out of reverence to Hashem. Okay? And it also says that that the eyes of every wise man are on his head. So what does it mean ultimately when we talk about the concept of God's divine presence, the Shechinah dwelling on someone's head? Does that mean that God only dwells on their head and not on their hands or their feet or other parts of the world? What exactly is that supposed to mean? Take yourself at home. No worries. So we'll start with chapter 51, page 648, one more time. Let's clarify further the citation from the child known as the Yenuka. In the Zohar, child is a figurative term here. Okay, it's actually a very deep spiritual concept that we encountered in chapter 35. We first need to have a bit of more understanding about the idea of the Shechinah, the divine presence, resting on an object in this world. We say that it rested in the chamber of the Holy of Holies, right, in the temple. That's the holiest spot in the world. And so too in all other instances of the Shechinah resting. What does it mean that God's divine presence, known as the Shechinah, rests? I mean, if God is all pervasive, God is omnipotent, omniscient, right, omnipotent, or omnipresent, it means he's everywhere. So what does it mean that he just rests? He rests in this place and not, what it would imply in this place and not someplace else. So we say that God's divine presence rested in the Holy of Holies, which is using God's divine presence rested in the Holy of Holies. Would that imply that's the only place that it rested? How about in Pasadena in the Holy of Holies, right over here in the library, or any other place? So the explanation is as follows. In the book of Job, it says, "From my flesh I shall perceive God." So it uses the spiritual phenomena can be discerned by the human body. How? Or from the human body. It's similar to the notion that we learned about this, like how many limbs does the body have? According to Torah, it's 248 limbs and 365 blood vessels or sinews, however you want to translate it. Okay, so does that mean that a person's soul dwells in all those 248 limbs and or 365 blood vessels / sinews, or it dwells in one place and then from there it kind of spreads forth? And if yes, where's that one place? Remember, we studied quite a few chapters back. Where does the divine soul dwell within the body? The predominant dwelling place in the brain, exactly, and also the right ventricle of the heart.
Yes.
So does that imply, though, then that the Shechinah, the divine soul that I have, is only in the brain and not in my heart and or kidneys, kishkis, whatever, any other part of the body? So he explains that God, of course, is to be found everywhere. Just like your soul, in a sense, vivifies every element of your body. There's not one part of your body that's not being vivified by your divine soul. So the Tanya continues to discuss how the soul's manifestation in the brain flows to the rest of the body. Bottom of 649. So basically, each bodily part receives a specialized energy that's catered to it. In other words, that the energy for the eyes to see is unique to the eyes. The energy for the ears to hear is unique to the hearing. The energy in your legs to walk is unique to your legs. So I mean, honestly, conversely, if the energy to see somehow went to your feet and not the other way around, well, it'd be a bit of a problem, right? Because your feet don't see a whole lot. Or the energy to walk ended up in your ears. So Hashem, Baruch Hashem, made it in such a way, whereas every limb and every sinew/blood vessel of the body is given the requisite energy, spiritual energy also, that it needs to be able to exist. Because ultimately, yes, granted, so physiologically, obviously, we're alive as long as our heart beats and whatever, the brain's moving, etc. But spiritually speaking, what happens that, God forbid, when a person passes, what makes them die essentially is that their soul leaves them. Because otherwise, they don't look any different physically, at least right after a person passes away, than they did when they were alive. They may look like they're sleeping, or their eyes may be open, or whatever it may be. The difference is that the soul leaves. So it's that soul that vivifies and gives life to every element of the body, catered to the specific needs or level of energy that limb, organ, what have you needs. And each one is different. So even, for example, what would be like one of the lowest levels of life force that are in our bodies? What part of our body requires the less, or perhaps one of the least levels of life force? Fingernails, toenails, hair. Exactly, which is why when you cut them, they don't hurt. Are they alive? Well, they're alive because your hair grows and your nails grow, etc. But it doesn't hurt to cut them. But it does mean that there's not a vivifying force in them. There has to be, otherwise they wouldn't grow. Correct? So even the toenails, let's say the lower extremity of the body, even that gets a requisite amount of vivifying life that it needs to be able to grow toenails and not grow fingers or whatever it is, any other limb. Okay, so page 650. As we know from our experience that the soul and the brain is connected with the organs, since the brain feels everything the 248 bodily parts do and everything that happens to them. So the Tanya explains how the soul's energy passes to the various bodily parts. How does it get from point A to B? I mean, physiologically, we know that the body is largely kept alive through your blood, your circulatory system, right? Oxygen goes through your blood and everything else. But spiritually speaking, what keeps it going? Now, the different powers and energies which the body's parts receive are not a direct product of the soul's core itself. In other words, it's not the soul itself that's divided in its core into 248 separate pieces. There's one soul, okay, and it's from that, then that soul then goes and vivifies all the various parts of the body. So, which then enters the 248 different locations, each power fitting into the precise form of the various parts of the body's anatomy. Because if this were true, it would mean that the soul's divine essence and core would be cast in a physical form, shape, and image like the body's image, God forbid. So if we were to say that the soul's core is made up of 248 parts, if you will, and then each part is given to whatever part of the body that needs it, so that would imply that the core of the soul is not one thing in and of itself, just made up of a lot of different parts, which is not really the case. It's made up of one part. It's one soul. And from that soul, then it sends forth the various vivifying abilities to all the limbs of the body. But it's not that the core of the soul is made up of multiple pieces, or 248 pieces, if you will. Because then it would, as he says, cast it into a physical form. The soul is not a physical entity. If it was a physical entity, so you can say, yes, made up of 248 parts, and then it magically somehow gets into each part as it should, and finished. But it's not. Yes.
I have a very basic question, and I read about it in many classes, but what is the definition of soul?
The definition in what language? The definition of your soul is ultimately what allows you to be alive. It's not a physical entity. It's an actual part of God that God vests in you or us or anyone else the moment basically at birth. I mean, the soul comes in various stages, it's explained. So, for example, and this will be on the scope of this course, but basically, the question is whether a baby in utero, is it considered a human being or not? This is the age-old, arguments back and forth. Abortion, yes, no. Is it permitted, not permitted? When is it permitted? Up to what point is it permitted, etc. But the point of the matter is, from the moment of gestation, let's just say, and onward, once an embryo is formed, there's some form of life that's there that allows the embryo to grow, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't grow. Now, whether it's halachically a viable human being or not, it depends when. Like for the first month, it's not, basically, but afterwards it takes on more of a viability. So, which is why, God forbid, if, let's, for example, a child is still born, nonetheless, that child has to be buried. Even though the child never lived, per se, a day in this world, we still bury the child. Child, actually, it's a boy, is actually even given a bris and a name. There's,
Really?
yeah, because that way its soul goes up pure, holy. It's given a name. It's not buried in the general part of the cemetery. It's like a section they'll have for situations as such. And honestly, more often than not, the parents don't even know exactly where exactly the child is buried. Just for their own psychologically, it's not healthy for them. But they know it's a Chevra Kadisha. The burial society takes care of all that. If somebody, God forbid, has a limb amputated and there's a bone in it, as a developed human being, that limb has to be buried. Can't be discarded or whatever they may do with it in a hospital. If there's a bone in it of a decent size. So for God forbid, if somebody loses a leg, they'd have to actually have the leg buried as opposed to just throwing it out or whatever they do. Yeah.
So if that happens to someone in the hospital, so are there instructions if they're
So
Jewish?
they have to be instructed as to what to do.
Oh, never knew.
Yeah, they're instructed in how they want to proceed, because otherwise hospitals do whatever the hospitals normally do or don't. You know what I mean? Well, I don't want to ruin your dinner, so.
No, that's a good.
But that's, yes. Well, in general, it's important that a hospital understands a person's directives, whether they're written or not, in advance. Okay, so going back to what I was saying before. So the point of the matter is that, to answer your question, the soul is not a physical entity. It's a spiritual entity that allows a person to live, any human being. So, not just human beings. Anything that's living, that exists actually in this world, has a soul. Even what we call inanimate objects like a stone or what have you, has a soul. Granted, it's not like the soul that you and I have, but still in all, it has a form of a soul which allows it to exist. If it had no soul, then the rock couldn't even exist. Even though you don't normally see rocks walking down the street by themselves if you're sober. Okay. Well, if you're not sober, you can see anything you like. It's not a problem. Rather, in truth, the soul is just one single non-composite spiritual essence, totally devoid of physical form, and it's devoid of any notion or semblance of physical space, dimension, or boundary in its essential core. So it's impossible to say that the essence of the soul is found more so in the brain than in the head and the feet. Why? Because the essential core of the soul doesn't possess physical, spatial attributes or boundaries, so it's everywhere within the body. Only within that essential core is absorbed in potential 613 different types of power and energy, 248 limbs, 265 sinews, what have you. Total of 613. Which can actually emerge and be revealed from their hidden potential state. So, which can actually emerge and be revealed from their hidden potential state to energize the 248 bodily parts and 365 major blood vessels of the body through engagement with the energizing animal soul, which also possesses the same array of 248/365 types of power and energy. So as he sums it up, like its creator, the pure divine soul cannot possibly be a composite entity of different powers. On the other hand, each of the body's parts requires specific and diverse powers for their functioning. We must therefore say that while the specific powers don't actually exist within the soul, they're in potentia. The soul nevertheless produces them out of its innate potential. Rob, is that you? We're on chapter 51, page 651, if you have the book. Just anecdotally, there's a place in, I think it was in Death Valley, if I remember correctly, which had baffled scientists, in which they saw these huge boulders, okay, that it looked like that they had moved basically from one place. You can see like the track, if you will, the marks, and moved, I don't know, 200 feet away with no footprints. It's not like someone carried them. And try and figure out how these boulders will get from point A to B, because rocks normally don't walk on their own, as I said, if you're sober. Now, I'm not sure if the scientists were sober or not. And it baffled them for the longest time until they finally figured out what was it. It's basically wind. There's very strong wind currents that come down, and it's kind of a flat, maybe slippery surface or whatever it is, and actually moves these huge rocks that weigh hundreds and hundreds of pounds. But other than that, they don't move on their own. All right, moving right along. That was just for trivia purposes. Midway down 651. Now, it was regarding the flow into the body of all these 613 types of powers and energies from a state of latency in the soul. It was said that the main location and resting of this flow and soul expression is all in the brain within the head, right? That's what we said. Where's the neshama's primary residence? In one's brain. Therefore, the intellectual powers receive first from the soul, the power and energy which is suitable for them, for your intellectual abilities, befitting their temperament and properties, namely the powers of Chachma Bina V'das, wisdom, cognition, or understanding, and knowledge, the power of thought, and everything related to the brain. Page 652. And he explains here another reason for the importance of the brain is as the soul's main location is because it's sort of like the hub, like the central battery pack for everything else in the body. And the brain doesn't only receive power energy from the soul itself. Rather, all the powers and energies destined for the other limbs also enter and are initially contained within the brain of the head. So basically, everything starts from the brain. And then eventually from the brain, it gets dispersed accordingly where it's supposed to go. There in the brain is the nucleus and root of all soul flow, the disclosure of all the soul's light and energy. And it is from there in the brain that illumination from the soul spreads to all the rest of the limbs. And every limb gets the appropriate energy for it. The soul's power of sight is disclosed in the eye, the soul's power of hearing in the ear, and for as we know, all these soul powers spread to the limbs from the brain. Because it's from the brain that the entire soul's, which is the entire soul's primary location, in its overtly expressed form, and from there, all the energy is going to go to the rest of the body. Only specific powers drawing from all that energy will shine from there and spread to the body's specific parts. Like light that spreads and shines from the sun into private rooms. And even the heart receives its energy from the brain, which is why the brain inherently rules over it, as what's supposed to happen. In other words, that you're supposed to have your intellect ruling over your emotions and not vice versa. So in conclusion, number one, the soul's core is non-composite and devoid of any specific powers. Two, in the brain, many specific powers emerge from the latent potential of the soul that will later enter all the limbs and organs to energize them. And three, after the brain takes the power it needs, the remaining powers spread from the brain into the rest of the body. So that's the analogy, in a sense, given between how the neshama of the soul rests within ourselves and what it'll be like in the rest of the world. And we get to that in just a second. Just to go on a little tangent, first a little chaim here. It's coffee, not just for those who are wondering, because what else would you drink out of it, like opaque. Yeah, there's something on the table. When it comes, God forbid, to a person who who is suffering from what they call brain death. Okay,
Mhm.
so the question is, what is brain death halachically? What is brain death scientifically, and the like? And they don't necessarily line up one with the next in terms of pulling the plug. Okay, so practically speaking, from a halachic standpoint, raw halachic standpoint, as long as there's still life in the body of sorts, even if the body is being kept alive on machines, there's still life. Okay. So the question is, at what point, let's say that you have a neurologist comes in and says that the person's brain dead. I mean, so the machines keep the heart going, what have you, but there's no other reaction whatsoever. Is one allowed to disconnect, not allowed to disconnect, and the like. And it's something that a proper rabbinic authority should be consulted. Somebody in particular, I've been in the middle of it. I'm not a maven on the medical end of it for sure, but I spoke to at the time, and I had dealt with this issue on a personal level with various people. Rabbi Tendler, if you ever heard of him, Rabbi Moshe Tendler, bless his memory. He was a rabbi doctor, so to speak, very well known, very well published, lived back east. So I called him about a particular situation. It was somebody whose grandmother was in Cedars, and the doctor said she was brain dead, and the family was reluctant to pull the plug, and then the whole story. And in his opinion, there are various opinions about this, that if two board certified neurologists administered, I forgot the actual neurological test, there was a name to it, and it came back negative, then in his opinion, not only are they allowed to disconnect, but they should, because it's considered to be disrespectful to the body, which is ultimately what they ended up doing in that case. There are other more religious, in the more, a little more radical religious world, Chabad inclusive, we would not just disconnect under those circumstances. And it's a difficult thing, because in reality is obviously the brain dictates to the rest of the body what to do. Now it's true, machines can keep a heart going for an extended period. I mean, at some point the heart gives out, but it can go on for a long time, go on for weeks or sometimes longer, months. Sorry?
Years.
Well, if the person's brain dead totally, I don't know for the last years, but could, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but it can certainly go on for a long time, and it's very difficult on the family. It's like there's no progress, nothing's moving, nothing's happening. So what are we doing? That type of thing. Other than going back and forth to the hospital every day to wonder what happened. So from an emotional standpoint, that's an issue in and of itself, and it's difficult. There's no question about it. But halachically, because the brain is the sort of your neshama, your soul, that's its main abode. And therefore, it's from the brain that all the rest of the body receives its vitality, or even physically speaking, all of its, the electrical impulses that come down, whatever, through your brain, spinal cord, whatever, your nervous system, this system, whatever it may be. So if the brain doesn't work, God forbid, then the body stops working, or part of the brain doesn't work, like God forbid someone has a stroke. So then certain parts of the body are not going to work because certain parts of the brain were adversely affected, whatever it may be. I'm not here to give you a lesson in science, but my point more so is that because it's the brain, they're able to do a lot of different types of transplants nowadays. And one thing they have not been able to transplant is the brain. I don't know if they're ever going to be able to transplant the brain because it's what basically runs the entire body. It's the central battery pack, and taking someone else's brain into one's body that has different wiring, if you will, to a degree. I don't know if that's physically possible. I'm not a neurologist, and I'm not on the transplant team.
Well, they could take something from the person and maybe in the future create their brain out of.
So they're 3D printing a lot of
Take a
stuff.
piece of the brain even.
But a brain, I
I
don't
don't
think
know.
that a brain, I don't know, but my assumption is that a brain can't, not something like a piece of liver that can regrow, whatever it may be. I don't know that a brain can take a piece of brain and it doesn't grow into
I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean,
Because all the memories.
everything's in there, in that gray mass, as they call it. The cold gray mass. Sorry? They don't, but it's not, I don't know what medically they can do or not. I'm not, again, I'm not that. But spiritually, it wouldn't work. Because if the brain is the source of the person's neshama and soul, so this, granted, it's the physical, system, but there's the spiritual, so you can't transplant souls from one body. Only God can do that. So I don't even think, even if they were physically able to do it, I don't know how that would work.
Yeah.
Well, everything, the whole, so one can transplant a heart.
computer with no software. It would,
Right, but you can't wipe it clean. It's not like, I don't think you can wipe a brain clean of all of its software, so to speak, and just reprogram it the way you want. I don't know that that's even possible. I don't know. Anyway, it's thrown out.
1950s horror films.
Yes.
Well,
They had
yeah,
those. Do you remember there was a guy who
Yeah.
he got a pianist's hands and suddenly he could
exactly. I'm not sure if
you
it works.
just break conjuring that up on big brains.
Yeah, I was actually just in the hospital. My brother-in-law, Khan's brother, had
Right.
a lung transplant. So the nurse, I spent the night there on Sunday night. So I was talking to one of the nurses, and she's a non-Jewish woman. The discussion came up about what a Jew is allowed to have transplanted. Can they have, like, for example, pig's valve, for a heart valve, which often they'll use either bovine or pig or whatever it may be. Can a Jew have a pig's valve put in? And the answer is yes.
Saves
Question,
life.
why? Not just a matter of saving life, because what's forbidden in terms of non-kosher is strictly if it's the way you eat it. Exactly. If it's orally taken through the mouth and eaten the way you normally eat, that you can't do. But transplanting it into the body is a non-issue completely. So the answer is yes. One could have, if God forbid they needed a valve replacement, they could get a pig's valve or whatever else they use. I'm not
So
sure.
bovine origin medication, which you eat, then that's
So- Okay, so because it's being orally taken. So when, for example, chondroitin, okay, glucosamine chondroitin, if I'm correct, has shellfish in it, and that's something which is orally taken. It's a vitamin. It's not typically viewed as a medicine. Medicine has a different halakhic classification than vitamins or vitamins, as they say. So if it's medication that the doctor prescribed that one has to take, then they need to take whatever they have to take. So for example, many capsules that contain medication have gelatin, which come from non-kosher, typically speaking, non-kosher sources, okay? I mean, there is fish gelatin. It's not commonly used. Some of the kosher vitamins that are in gel capsules will use fish gelatin, but it's expensive and it's hard to source. It's not common. But when a medication, you can take it. You have to take it. Vitamins is more of an issue. Unless the doctor says you must take A, B, C, or D, like that of a medication, then it's different. So it's the same thing in any type of vitamin or what have you that would have animal, whatever, extracts in it, whether it's bovine or what.
I would just say something like iron sometimes is necessary because.
But
of
iron,
that a person could
I
be
don't
anemic.
I don't think
And would you classify that as a vitamin?
iron is
You
it's
would-
not met. There's no animal. I don't think there's any animal anything in it.
No.
Minerals not an issue. But they make most vitamins, not all, but most vitamins, like for chondroitin, you're not going to get with a hexture likely, unless it's made out of, I don't know, substitute for the crabs or whatever they're using in there. But other than that, most vitamins you can get with a hexture. There's actually a few companies that make a whole slew of vitamins from A to Z and in between. So, okay, moving right along. Back to section 2, how the Shechinah rests in all the worlds. Again, the Shechinah being the divine presence. So following the parallel between the human and divine image, from my flesh I shall perceive God. The Tanya now compare. The Tanya will now compare. I should put on my glasses, I can read what it says. The resting of the soul in a particular location to the resting of the Shechinah. And figuratively speaking, the way in which the soul power is energized in individual limbs is identical to the way the blessed infinite one fills the individual components of all the worlds and energizes them. And all these components are very numerous. In every world there are endless and limitless creatures, as God is infinite. Hundreds of millions of levels of angels and souls. And as well as a vast number of worlds without end or limit, each higher than the other. So we studied about, the classic four, for lack of a better term. But in reality, there are thousands and thousands of levels of worlds, if you will, that exist that are not necessarily enumerated, with a name, but nonetheless, they're there. It's all part of this Simpson process, which involved myriads and myriads of levels. Myriad technically is 10,000, but you can just extrapolate from there. But unlike these numerous components, which all differ in the divine illumination they receive, each one gets exactly the exact amount of divine energy that it needs for that spiritual world or angel, whatever it may be. As in the above example, the essential core of the soul, which has no specific location in the body. It's interesting because you can use the same concept. I mean, even, for example, let's see, when it comes to energy or, electricity, what have you. So if every machine runs on whatever current or volts or wattage or whatever it may be, depending on what you're using. And if you overload it, what's going to happen?
It burns out.
You burn it out, right? But if it's underfed, if you will, it's not going to work. It's not going to work well. So everything has a specific amount of energy, in this case, let's say electricity, that it needs to work efficiently. The concept's not hard to transpose then to our soul and our body, and all the more so to God in every level of creation. All the spiritual worlds, angels, etc., each one gets a catered amount of divine energy that's unique to it, to whatever that thing is. We're on page 654. As the Tikkuni Zohar states, that God is hidden from all the hidden. What does that mean? Even in the hidden worlds above, all the hidden, he still remains hidden and concealed. You would think, okay, down here, fine, I don't see God overtly. But I gotta imagine that you get to Atzilos or these greater levels that God is, you see him all over the place. It's not true. I mean, relative to what we see, yes, it's great. It would be grand revelation. But ultimately, it's still considered a hiddenness of what God truly is, or who God truly is. Just as he's hidden and concealed in the lower worlds, since no thought can grasp him at all, even in the upper worlds. So it follows that his essential core is found there in exactly the same way that it's found here. So in other words, when we talk about God being omnipresent, that he's everywhere equally. It's not like there's more God in here than there is over there. The same God that exists here exists everywhere you can imagine in the world, no matter where it may be. Now, granted, there's greater levels of concealment of godliness in some places, but that's because of the concealment. The actual godliness is there. It's all pervasive. It's, for example, if you have a light, a very bright light, so and then you can take you cover it with a filter or some sort of a lens that's going to distill or diffuse the amount of light. So yeah, you can make it dark enough at some point you won't even see the light. Does that change the light whatsoever? Does the light care whether you put one filter, two filters, or 1,000 filters, or it can't even be seen? It doesn't make any difference to the light. The light's exactly the same. It's just a matter of removing all those coverings. In a sense, the same concept applies in our world and the spiritual worlds above. The God is all pervasive. God is everywhere. The question is, what do we see, what we don't see? How many filters are there between what I'm able to perceive or anything can perceive and God himself? So having explained how we're midway down 654, having explained how the Blessed Infinite One's essential core is present equally everywhere, we can appreciate that only the flow and disclosure of the light varies from world to world. Not the actual godliness, but the amount of light that's apparent. And the difference between the upper and lower worlds is not in the presence of the essential core light itself, but in the flow of energy from the Blessed Infinite One. The extent to which the Blessed Infinite One flows and shines light openly from its prior concealment. So, there's less concealment in the upper worlds and more concealment down here. Just like our limbs, like, for example, the amount of energy, physical energy, that my toenails need is not the same energy that my heart needs to say. Because if my toenails got the same energy as my heart, I'm not sure what would happen to them, but it wouldn't work. But certainly if my heart only got the amount of energy that my toenails have, that would definitely be a problem, right? So, and this is one of the reasons why the flow and distribution of energy from God is referred to figuratively as light. It's a common usage throughout all of teachings of Hasidus and Kabbalah. Because if you block the flow of water in a pipe, what happens? Pressure builds up, and at some point or another, you're going to create a problem. But if you block the ray of light coming from a light bulb, the bulb remains unaffected. Okay, it's what I mentioned before. That's why the Kabbalists chose to depict the emergence of God's energy as light, to indicate that it remains unaffected by whatever happens to it. The message is you simply can't influence God in any way. We read actually in the davening chakras every morning in kind of the prelims. It says, Atu achlei nivra ha'ilam, atu mish nivra. In other words, you are what you were like before you created the world, and you are what you're like after you created the world, meaning that God didn't change an iota from pre-creation to post-creation or anything in between. Unlike that of a human being, that you might be different, tired, fetchy, wow, whatever it may be. God didn't change whatsoever. So even before the world was created, God was exactly the same as he is today. And this flow of light from God energizes the worlds and the creatures found there. So the higher worlds receiving a little more disclosure than the ones below. There's more revelation. And all the creatures in these worlds receiving a different amount of light according to their capabilities and disposition. So there is an individualized flow from the blessed and infinite light flowing and shining to each recipient, fitting the recipient's capabilities and disposition. So everything gets exactly what it needs. But the lowest worlds, even the spiritual lower worlds, don't receive so much disclosure of the light. Rather, when the blessed infinite light provides them with compatible energy and light to sustain them, he does so through formidable filters. I guess you can use an example of the sun. So the sun is what, 93 million miles away, something around there? 93, 97? I think it's 93 million miles away, which is pretty far. You know, what's 6 million miles between you and I anyway, what difference does it make? But the point of the matter is, it's quite far. 93 million miles is farther than anything we can even fathom. And let's just say, for argument's sake, that we were 1,000 miles closer than we are today. What would happen to our planet?
It would roast.
It'd be too hot and
We'd have a big problem, a lot of problems. If we were 100 miles closer, we'd have a lot of problems. So you have about 100 miles with 100 relative to 93 million is like a drop in the bucket. So in other words, our planet Earth, let's say for argument's sake, that's what most of us relate to, has to be in a specific spot, okay, in a specific distance from the sun, so that you and I and every other living anything on this planet is able to be sustained. It doesn't burn up or it doesn't rust or whatever other problems you can have with too much heat. I've never been to the top of Mount Everest. Anybody climbed Everest in this class? Not recently? K2, K1? Mount Baldy, that's close. That's close, yes. I've skied at the top of Mount Baldy. But as you know, that when you get to the higher elevations, even Mount Baldy was 9,000 feet? I don't remember what it is. 10,000 feet, the sun is much brighter. Okay, you feel, honestly, you can be in the winter, you can get sunburnt, and it can be 20 below. It doesn't make a difference. And the higher you go, obviously, the closer you are to the sun, even though relatively speaking, it's not that much. It's a few thousand feet or 5,000, 10,000 feet. Relative to 93 million miles, what's a big deal? But it makes a credible difference because we as human beings we're created to be able to successfully live at certain levels, A, in terms of the sun, and B, even just in terms of the oxygen levels, how much oxygen we have. So at sea level, it's interesting because water boils at a lower temperature the higher you go. I don't know if you know that. Yes. So if you go to Denver, which is Mile High City, water actually boils at a lower temperature than it does over here.
Yeah, same with the ovens.
Well,
No, you changed.
Oh, I don't know about cooking.
For baking, they always tell you
to go a little less.
A lower temperature.
But when it comes to boiling, it is. But that's the way Hashem created the world to be. So if you're living at sea level, great. But anybody who's gone from sea level up to 10,000 feet, and you didn't stop like somewhere in between, or to 15,000 feet, knows that people get headaches, nosebleeds, and whatever the rest of the stuff is. Okay. I actually learned that the hard way because I was once many years ago. I was in Hawaii with Chani and on the Big Island.
Are you okay?
And maybe Chai was a baby. One of my kids was a baby. I don't know who went along with us. They were an infant. And we want to go to Mauna Loa. I want to go up to the observatory at the top. So we drove, and there's a spot maybe about halfway up. You pull over or whatever it be, just kind of adjust the altitude. There's a little store there. We went in, look around, some tchotchkes. He's supposed to stay there for 20 minutes, half hour to sort of adjust. And he saw us with the baby, said, "You can't go up there." I said, "Well, why not?" She said, "Just no. For an adult, it's fine. A baby, I don't know how old she was, X amount of months old, whatever it may be. It can literally be life-threatening to a baby to be able to go and have that altitude change, because you start at sea level. I mean, in Hawaii, you're at sea level. And going up within half hour or whatever it takes, 45 minutes to get up to the top, it can be very dangerous to a baby. And God forbid, if you get a call up there, there's not a lot of hospitals at the top of Mauna Loa. Okay, next time you want to take a baby to the top, yes. I'll save you the drive, because we drove right back down again. I never made it to the top.
You didn't leave the baby with the store?
There was a thought there, but no store, no stork. No, we had to take her with us. He doesn't remember anyway, you know what I'm saying? Okay.
That's
Which
what you
baby
think.
was it?
Yeah, I think it was Chaya. I don't know. Chaya maybe remembers. At some point, I can get a little fuzzy. Who, what, when, where. We're midway down 655. And the filters to which the blessed infinite one filters and hides his light and energy from the lower worlds becomes progressively so strong and powerful to the point where this physical world of inanimate matter is created, in which God's light can't be discerned at all. And while even inanimate matter is created and sustained by the energy and light that flows and shines into it, and it's a light filtered, hidden and concealed through numerous powerful filters, which hide and conceal the light and energy to the point in inanimate matter. Neither light nor energy is visible or apparent. Only crude physical matter which appears inanimate. Nevertheless, in reality, within those apparently inanimate things, let's say it's a stone or whatever it is, there's a light and energy which brings them into being continually. Something from nothing, like anything else in the world, so that they shouldn't return to be null and void as they were originally, before they were created. So in a concluding thought, Tanya stresses that God's diminished light, which powers this world, and infinite blessed infinite light are not separate. They're one thing. The light that sustains the physical world, even the inanimate, ultimately comes from the blessed infinite light, only it has passed through numerous filters. As it says in Kabbalah and Eitz Chaim, that the light and energy in the Earth's physical globe, which is apparent to our eyes, is from the lowest level of the lowest sphere of energy, Malchus of Malchus. Malchus is the lowest of the spiritual worlds. From the lowest spiritual world, Asiya. Malchus Yitzira. But since all spiritual entities are interconnected, remember that, if you remember going back a long time ago, each of the spiritual worlds has 10 levels to it, right? You have Chachma, Bina, Vadad, etc., of Atzilut, and then same thing in Bria, etc. So even at the bottom of Asiya, the lowest world, the lowest of the low of the lowest worlds, within it is still vested what? Malchus Yitzira. The Malchus of Asiya has the Malchus of the next world of Yitzira in it, and so on, up through all the worlds. And then it has the Malchus of Bria and the Malchus of Atzilus, etc. So that within all expressions of Malchus are the 10 spheres of Atzilus, the highest of the 4 worlds, which are united with their emanating source, the blessed infinite one. So since the spheres are interconnected, even the lowest sphere in the lowest world contains something of the highest sphere of the highest world, which receives directly from the blessed infinite light. And that is chapter 51. Walk in the park.